This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 76 of the Here's How podcast for the 14th of August 2018. Last month I talked to the leader of one minor party. This month I'll talk to a senior member of the Labour Party about their past and future performance.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
Coming up on today's podcast, do you ever feel that the UK Labour Party's behaviour on Brexit is outrageous, is disgraceful?
Yeah, I do.
Expand.
I look at the greatest right-wing catastrophe in post-World War II Britain, the closed mindset of Little England.
That's coming up shortly, but first I just want to mention that I'm trying to make the podcast more regular and take more time in research. So to justify that, I've created a Patreon account where you can make a small voluntary donation for each podcast if you think it's worth it. I want to say a special thanks to Shane Chung, who signed up as a patron since the last podcast, and you can do the same as him. Just go to the website and follow the links. Also, I wanted to comment a bit about the controversy that blew up in the UK last week about Boris Johnson's comment about Muslim women who wear burkas. Boris Johnson, in case you don't know, in case you've been living under a rock, is the Tory Brexiteer who resigned in protest that Prime Minister Theresa May's Chequers plan wasn't hardline enough. Now, everything about Johnson's behaviour in regards to Brexit suggests that he has little or no principled beliefs on the matter and is just using it as a leverage to try to get himself into her job, but that's a different story. Johnson started this controversy when he said that women who wear the niqab or burqa look like bank robbers or letterboxes. Let's be clear about terms here. By far the majority of Muslim women who wear headscarves wear what's called a hijab, or something very similar. This basically covers their hair and neck. Some go further and wear a niqab, which also includes a veil which exposes only their eyes. And the most extreme, notably in Afghanistan under the Taliban, wear a burqa which even covers the eyes with a semi-transparent gauze. It's worth noting that women covering their hair is by no means confined to the Islamic world. It's common in more traditional areas like in Greece or Armenia, both of them Christian, for women to wear headscarves in public. It's pretty common in Russia too, particularly in more rural areas, and it would have been quite normal in Ireland up to maybe 50 years ago. I have a couple of views about this. Firstly, for people in the West, I don't like the idea of people wearing special clothes to mark out the fact that they are of a religious minority. I don't confine that to Muslim women. The right-wing American commentator Ben Shapiro has defended the right of Muslim women to wear the hijab, pointing out that he wears a kippah, the Jewish skullcap. I disagree with Muslim women wearing a hijab in public. I disagree with Ben Shapiro or other Jewish men wearing a kippah in public because I think that it's bad for the cohesion of society to have some people marking themselves out as not normal, with the rest of us, by corollary, being normal. To be clear, I think that people have the right to wear the kippah or the hijab. I don't want any laws to prevent them from wearing them. They have the perfect right to make that choice, but I have the right to disagree with that choice. But I think that the niqab and the burqa are in a different class. They both create a barrier between people, and it's not a symbolic barrier like the kippah or a hijab. It's literally a physical barrier that comes between members of society. Facial expressions are an incredibly important component of communication, whether it's between a parent and their kid's teacher, between neighbours saying hello when they take out the rubbish, or between a barista and somebody ordering a coffee. In a society where trust and community are in short supply, blocking the communication of facial expressions has the potential to exacerbate tensions in a way that we just don't need. That said, I don't think that we should ban the niqab or the burqa either. I disagree with them, but I disagree with a lot of things, and I don't expect my personal standards to be enforced on everybody else by the government. I can see a case for prohibiting face coverings that could amount to a disguise in some high security zones, but apart from that, I believe in individual rights. So you might think that I agree with Boris Johnson. Well, no. I don't believe that Boris Johnson has been struck by a sudden concern for either cohesion in society or for security. Boris Johnson is a cynical and manipulative politician. He quit Theresa May's cabinet because he thinks it's a good manoeuvre to eventually get her job. He wants to keep himself in the news, and he wants to appeal to a certain wing of the Conservative Party, so he made this statement knowing the attention that it would gather him. If you think that he cares about this issue, don't kid yourself. You can be sure that this isn't coming from a concern for security either. There was no talk about the danger of wearing motorcycle helmets or Halloween masks in secure areas. Johnson made this statement because, given the constituency that he's appealing to, bashing Muslims is a popular thing to do. If he was sincere, he could have made jokes about how silly Orthodox Jews look with idiosyncratic hairstyles and black clothes. But going after Jews doesn't fit his purpose, at least not yet. So when I hear about an argument over whether Johnson is right that Muslim women's face coverings have no place in the Western world, or that Johnson is trying to stir up sectarian bigotry for his own political ends, I don't see a contradiction there. I think that they're both true.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? If you want your point of view heard, dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. The lines are open 24/7 and you can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
In 2011, Aodhán Ó Ríordáin was one of the 37 TDs elected in the Labour Party's best ever election. In 2016, he was one of the 30 of those 37 who lost their seats in the Labour Party's worst ever general election. Between those two elections, he was a junior minister, and since then, he's been a member of Seanad Éireann. Aodhán, what's the Labour Party for?
The Labour Party is a centre-left party who believe in the power of the state to bring equality to the citizens of the country, believes in public services, believes in driving an equality agenda, believes in the Republican ethos of giving everybody an opportunity, regardless of their background, of their income bracket. That's what the Labour Party has always stood for workers' rights, for an equal Ireland. We're in the classic European tradition of the centre left. That's what we try to achieve. That's what we've tried to achieve in the past. We haven't always had the successes we would have liked, but we've actually achieved a huge amount in our 100 years. And I suppose now we're at a stage just coming out of government where what we did in government was pretty much soundly rejected by the people, as you've said there. So we have to, when you lose, be it in football or be it in life or be it in relationships or whatever, you either learn from it or you're destined to make the same mistakes again. So it's a very good question that you asked, because that's exactly the question we asked ourselves after the election. What is the Labour Party for? And the Labour Party has no right to exist. No political party has a right to exist.
The list that you gave me there, it's not hugely exciting, is it?
No. Well, equality is something that everybody says to believe in, but then when I actually get down to brass tacks of how to deliver it, it can be quite difficult. A lot of the stuff I engage in day to days are things like traveller rights, rights for people with disabilities, rights for people with addiction issues, rights for migrants, rights for the LGBT community. A lot of that stuff can be fashionable. Sometimes it can be very, very unfashionable. The reason I got into politics in the first place was educational disadvantage and trying to improve literacy rates amongst children. That is not very, cannot often get a huge amount of traction with people who are voting on election time, but still it's fundamentally important to children's empowerment and their chances of living in an equal society. If you can't read, through no fault of your own, because of the school you went to or the area which you're from, or the early school leaving of your parents, or for whatever reasons, circumstances of your upbringing, that's something that the state has to intervene to help and to empower. So
okay, but there isn't any party that disagrees with that, is there?
Well, there isn't, but there aren't.
Specifically with the Labour Party, what are you proud of achieving in your time in government?
In our time in government, you see, it's funny, when I joined the Labour Party was in 2002, it was a very different Ireland. The argument then was that there's a huge amount of resources available to government and they're not being spent fairly. And then, I joined, I ran in the local election, became a councillor, and then within 5 years, the entire economy had collapsed. And then it's a very different national conversation. The national conversation was the economy had collapsed, the IMF are running the place, and how best can we meet the demands of the IMF and the ECB. So, the reason I joined the Labour Party are now very different to the reasons that I'm still in the Labour Party. What did we achieve in government? Well, if you think of the country that we were in 2011 and the country that we are now, it's a much happier, much more prosperous place. We don't get the credit for that. Obviously, the main government party will get credit for that, but we provided the stability that the country needed at an essential time.
Go back to what you said there about managing out of the IMF bailout. There was choices made there, and it didn't really seem that there was much that the Labour Party had influence, or at least the Labour Party's ethos didn't seem to have much influence on that. So there was, for example, stuff about social welfare rates and so forth. There was also things in the IMF programme about reforming the legal profession. People on social welfare got kicked around. Lawyers were protected.
Well, there was 1.8 billion more of social welfare cuts that the IMF were demanding that didn't happen. I can appreciate that analysis.
No, but the IMF specifically said that the legal profession is in such a state that it is essentially a rentier class, that they are providing a drag on the economy because legal services are so expensive and making the law almost out of reach of a large proportion of the population, and the legal profession were entirely protected from reform.
And then I do recall the legal services bill going through the House. I do recall referenda on
the Bar Council saw it before the Cabinet did and got to veto anything they didn't like.
I mean, I appreciate the argument that you're making, that those with power tend to slow things up, and those without power feel the whip hand. I can appreciate that argument, and that would be my analysis.
Wasn't the Labour Party's position in government to prevent that?
Well, it was, but you see, I think going over old ground and all the rest of it, we walked into a situation where we were on the back foot from day one, because I think we had a poor election in 2011. We overpromised. We underanalyzed how difficult it is to be in government. We gave the impression in opposition that everything will be almost so much simpler.
Do you mean in policy terms or in administrative terms?
In every single term. We gave the impression that the government that was there just needs to be replaced, and everything will be an awful lot easier. And every decision they make had no basis, and that, just give us an opportunity here, and everything will be rosy. And even though a lot of our documentation that we sent out were within the parameters that the ECB had laid down, and we didn't shy away in what we wrote down in our manifesto as to what had to happen in terms of budgetary restraints and all the rest of it, we gave the impression, and we gave the the rhetoric was very clear that it will be easier if we were just in. But I suppose the things that you do, it's hard to prove a negative. It's hard to prove to somebody on a doorstep or in society in general that it would have been worse if you hadn't been there, because people can say they see what you did, they see what you cut, they see what you you achieve 60% of what you wanted to achieve. People see the 40%. It's a bit like when you're a kid, you go home, you tell your ma you got 9 out of 10 spelling tests, and your ma tends to say, which one did you get wrong? So, but the perennial problem of the left is: do you go into government in order to effect some change, or do you stay out of government in order to achieve none?
The list of things that the Labour Party called it wrong on was really horrendous. Now, I'm not going to go into water charging or whatever, but the establishment of Irish Water was a flat-out catastrophe. That was an absolute orgy of consultants and management fees that got absolutely nothing done. And there were...
Well, see that? Well, I reject that. I reject this sort of...
You think the management of Irish Water was good?
No, I reject this sort of... and you just fall into the trap that I was just critical of the Labour Party of giving a broad sweeping statement that nothing was done.
No, I said that the list of issues where the Labour Party fell down and stuff that was, in the Labour Party's purview, that was part of their core message, was terrible.
Well, do you want me to give you a list? I mean, you spoke about social protection. I spoke about the 1.8 billion of social welfare cuts that didn't happen. I spoke about the rates that were protected. We can also speak about the minimum wage being enhanced twice, and setting up the Low Pay Commission, which is actually ensured that the minimum wage has been increased since we left government. I mean, at the time when we entered government, three things had happened across the economy, right? And we tried to put, and we were successful in this, in putting a threshold of decency under the economy. Public sector pay had been cut, the minimum wage had been reduced, and social welfare rates had been reduced across the board, except for the old age pension, because that's a key voting group for Fianna Fáil. So on those three fundamental areas that were based around driving down income in the economy, we put a threshold underneath all those three things, and then began to increase them. So in terms of maintaining the Croke Park Agreement, for example, in terms of public sector pay, and then renegotiating with public sector unions to ensure that I think there was only 1 day of industrial action in our 5 years in government. On the minimum wage, putting in a Low Pay Commission to ensure that the minimum wage was increased numerous of times, and then thirdly on social welfare payments that the core rate, the basic core rate, was maintained. Now, the pressure on this from within government, from within an IMF program, from a hostile media, was immense. But we managed to maintain that threshold of decency under the economy. Now, people can say we should have done more. People should say we should have stayed out of government and let Fine Gael, tear up the Croke Park Agreement, which was what they wanted to do.
That wasn't the line I was pursuing. Let me give you one.
Well, if I could just finish that point just for a second, and I do appreciate you giving me this opportunity, right? Fine Gael, their manifesto said to tear up the Croke Park Agreement, to maintain the cut in the minimum wage, and to reduce core social welfare rates by 4 cents from 188 to 184. That's what they were promising to do. That didn't happen, and the fundamental reason is because we were in government.
Aodhán, isn't the issue that the Labour Party advertise themselves as the defenders of the little guy? And you mentioned the Croke Park Agreement. The Croke Park Agreement, the details of it were essentially disgraceful. They protected the people at the top end of the pay scales, people who had been in the jobs for 20 years, and new people coming in were hit with much lower pay rates, for example, teachers. But let me give you one specific thing. The appointment of Noreen O'Sullivan, which was signed off by the Cabinet, including all the Labour Party ministers in the Cabinet, that was an unforced error that anybody could have seen at the time. It was obvious that there's massive problems of corruption within Garda Síochána. It's obvious that, to put it at its very kindest, Martin Callanan was utterly incapable of dealing with that, and that his sympathies lay with the corrupt and not with the whistleblowers. Noreen O'Sullivan was the woman who sat and nodded and smiled alongside Martin Callanan as he said that the whistleblowing was, quote, disgusting. Wasn't it a disaster appointing her as Garda Commissioner?
Well, you introduced that bit about the guards having a swipe at the Croke Park Agreement and unequal pay. Those two things are not connected. The unequal pay or the pay inequality was brought in the first.
Let me tell you how they are connected. The Labour Party, despite the fact that they sell themselves as being the promoters of the little guy, of the people who are not so high up the income scale, in very, very many cases, when it came to making a call between favouring the people with the sinecures, the people who are there a long time, the people who are privileged, and those on the other end, the Labour Party fell on the wrong side of that fence.
Well, you see, you have no evidence for that statement. And I give it a reason why you've no evidence.
The party signed off on appointing Noreen O'Sullivan. That was a huge mistake, wasn't it?
Okay, no. All right, you've taken the entire pay scale of every single public servant's job and you've whittled it down into one instance of one appointment. Let me talk to you about the pay scales for a second, then I'll deal with Noreen O'Sullivan issue, okay? The pay inequality was brought in before we came into government. It was brought in the 1st of January 2011. In terms of what we negotiated in government, in terms of the little guy, the only people who got a pay cut in terms of public service pay when we were in government was anybody over 65,000. We absolutely protected the pay of people under 65,000, and anybody over 65,000 got a 5% pay cut. Now, that wasn't very popular with high-ranking civil servants and public servants. I got that in the ear every time I went to a door in the general election in 2016, but it was the right thing to do. Now, we wanted to protect the pay of people at 20, 25, 35,000 in the lower regions of the public service. I accept that we didn't do enough on teacher pay, but it wasn't our invention, and it was something that we were trying to work with teacher unions in terms of trying to restore their pay. But I'll say this much: not one of our public pay agreements, and there was two of them while we were in government, were rejected by all three teacher unions. Since we left government, all three teacher unions have rejected the most recent pay deal. So in terms of industrial peace and trying to ensure that the little guy, as you described, was protected, I'm quite happy that we did that because the unions all signed off on what we did. Now we have a situation where there's industrial chaos, certainly in terms of the teaching profession, because the unions are not signed up to the pay deals as agreed by government. In terms of Noreen O'Sullivan, I mean, we're now blaming Labour for mistakes in departments of which we weren't senior ministerial positions there. But I would say about Noreen...
Anybody who had their ear to the ground knew that Noreen O'Sullivan was an entirely inappropriate person to be Garda Commissioner.
That wasn't the case. At the time, and I remember her being appointed, that wasn't to receive wisdom that an individual person was entirely inappropriate. In fact, there was a level of celebration is the wrong word, but recognition that having a female at the head of An Garda Síochána was actually quite a positive thing.
You put virtue signalling above competence.
Let's get beyond the personality for a second. In terms of structures with An Garda Síochána, the policing authority was a Labour Party demand which was brought into effect in government, and it was only there because of our insistence, and ensured that because of us being in government, the policing authority was established. I will agree with you, though, that it was extremely difficult to be a member of a government with failings in health, failings in justice. I mean, I'd be quite frank about some of the things that Fine Gael ministers did in terms of managing a situation. I mean, when Alan Shatter went on primetime and called out Mick Wallace for a traffic misdemeanor, I mean, that was incredibly damaging for what we were trying to achieve. You're trying to give a sense in government of being on top of things, about being fair, about not being underhand in any way. And
sure, and Aodhán, I understand, and I understand what you're saying about the economic case, and at the risk of sounding like Oliver Callahan's version of our finance minister, there's only that much money going around. But when it comes to justice, there isn't a budget that you have to distribute and give injustice to some people. There are very, very serious problems in the entire mechanism of the Garda Síochána, the Department of Justice and all that. That was known to anybody who had their ear to the ground. And for example, between Tommy Bruin and the Social Democrats and Fianna Fáil in 2015, on 5 different occasions, Francis Fitzgerald was asked, why is nothing being done about prosecutions over the Moriarty Tribunal? 20 years on after its report. And in 5 different occasions, she gave a copy and paste answer. That's to say, she gave word for word a verbatim answer, essentially saying that, and this is almost 20 years after the thing happened, she's saying that the Gardaí are waiting for advice from the DPP as to whether to start a criminal investigation. So it takes them 20 years to get advice as to whether or not they should start a criminal investigation from a DPP that I think was a Labour Party associated appointee. But isn't it the case that there is misgovernment in Ireland? Labour Party is not solely responsible for it, but the Labour Party has a lot of experience in government and did almost nothing to stand up to it in government.
Well, I see. You assume as to, again, this broad stroke of saying did nothing. I wasn't at cabinet. I can only assume that there was any amount of discussions about it. I know senior Labour cabinet people were exasperated as to the behaviour of certain ministers, but I'm quite sure Fine Gael ones were exasperated as some of ours. At the end of the day, in government you're going to get things wrong. I can't pretend that justice. When we came into government, the last department we thought would be giving us hassle and would bring down a government or bring down a minister was the Department of Justice, because it was because when we came into government, if we try to recast your mind back to 2011, the major issues obviously were financial. It was unemployment, emigration, mortgage arrears, housing, those kind of issues.
That's a reason to lose an election, not a reason to take out a government.
Yeah, but I would say this much about I completely agree with you or the analysis of the Department of Justice being out of control. I think it's far too big. I was in there as a junior minister. Now I wasn't dealing in the criminal side of things or the administration of Garda Síochána or anything like that. I was in the equality.
When you walked around the place, did it look like a modern, well-run office?
It felt, I'm being brutally honest here, it felt like a department that was too big, that was dealing with too many things. It felt like it had too much of a swagger about it. It felt like it had these bulletproof windows from the 70s and they had this sort of, macho sort of stance of itself. So I was at ministerial meetings, these MINMAC meetings, which is where the ministers would meet senior officials and the various different things would be discussed, and I'd be in for the issues relating to equality. And I got the sense of a department which really needed to be changed, divvied up. I don't think immigration, for example, or asylum belongs in that department. I think there's a law and order defence mechanism when it comes to all the issues. And actually, when it comes to change, now there was a Toland report, obviously, about the department. There was a huge amount happening in terms of the administration of justice. There was so much happening. I didn't really get the sense that it was possible for one senior minister to deal with it. And of course, senior minister changed on a number of occasions over the last number of years. It's hard to see them getting their, getting around to actually delivering the kind of change that's needed. But what we did do, we did reopen Templemore, and we did start training guards again, which is, I think, something that people often forget.
I want to move on from that. The Labour Party got, I think, about 6.6% of the vote in the 2016 election. It has not scored that highly in the opinion polls, so it's been below that in the opinion polls pretty much ever since. The most recent poll, Behaviour and Attitudes, have you on 3%, and there's a bunch of different parties there in the Dáil who are essentially in the margin of error territory: the Social Democrats, the Greens, the various Trotskyite far left groupings. And with all of those, they do seem to have a USP, something that you know about them. So the Social Democrats, Catherine Murphy in particular, has made a name for herself, particularly in chasing issues related to I&M and Dennis O'Brien. The Greens have made a particular issue of climate change. People like Mick Wallace and so forth have made an issue of following up on Garda corruption. When you hear about the Labour Party in the news, it's usually either that they've done badly on an opinion poll or there's some internal row. Aren't you really doing badly there that you don't have an issue that you're running with that people can identify with?
Well, look, the go-to political answer is, Asher, I don't look at polls and, I don't take them seriously.
No, I'm not asking about the polls. I'm asking about the issue.
About it. Well, I spoke to you earlier about education disadvantage, and, I spent a huge amount of my time talking about that, and I for example, recently sent out a policy paper about free education at primary level, got a bit of traction. If you're speaking about an issue that we haven't necessarily been identified, but I suppose we are still traumatised and have been traumatised until recently as about the electoral defeat. And I say that honestly, that we lost 70% of our staff, we lost 30% of more than 30%. We lost 30 TDs, as you mentioned earlier, and another senators. I mean, when we had a parliamentary party meeting, there used to be 50 people in the room. Now there's 11. There's a whole, Fianna Fáil went through this as well, and Fine Gael went through it before. There's a whole different sense of yourself that actually begins to emerge when you used to be one of 50 voices, then you're one of 11. And the weight of work that you have to do is bigger, and the staff that you have to help you is much reduced. And the reasons as to why all this happened has to really be, you have to come to terms with. So what we've been trying to do, I think, we're between two stools. Is one is to say, right, let's move on from government. Let's not talk about it ever again, and let's try and build for the future and to see what people are talking about. And then there's a level of actually, no, we did actually achieve a few things in government, and I think we should build on them. I think if you look at what Jed Nash is doing in terms of workers' rights, what Vanna Batrick has done in terms of gender equality and repealing the age amendment, if you look at what Alan Kelly's talking about in terms of the Vicky Phelan campaign and the smear test debacle. If you look at what Jan O'Sullivan's talking about in terms of housing, there's a lot of us talking about a lot of things. Is it a singular thing that people can latch onto? Maybe you're right, but we're not just a single issue party.
Aodhán, just to look at what's facing you, the Labour Party has about 50 councillors. Before the last local elections, or in the last local elections, you lost about 80 of. You went from 130 to about 50. So you have 50 councillors, 70 Ds, 4 senators. And in the next 12 months, there is certain to be local elections, and there's almost certain to be a general election as well. If you're on half the rating that you were in the last general election and less than half the rating that you were in the last local elections, it's entirely possible that your councillor base will be wiped out, that you lose more seats in the Dáil, and because your councillors are being wiped out, you're likely to lose most or all of your senators as well. The Labour Party could end up not just having a dozen people in the room in the parliamentary party meeting, but all the elected officials put together could be in very, very low double digits.
Yeah, I don't accept that's going to happen. I don't accept we're at 3% either. I mean, that's a behaviour and attitudes poll. The one I look at is Red C, and Red C has at 6%. Well, I know I said politicians say that when they're lying. I do look at the Red C poll is the one that I think most people take seriously, and actually the exit poll in the most recent referendum had it at 6% as well. And in Dublin, we're showing at 10%. Now, if you're at
6%, you're going to lose councillors.
No, see, just let me finish for a second.
Sure.
We got something in around the last local elections, and you should say we returned with 50. If you look at Dublin, where we're at 10% in every given opinion poll in the last number of years since the general election, that would point to a very healthy return of councillors in Dublin. Look, we do two things. We worry and obsess about the party, or we worry and obsess about issues. And I don't think I did, and most people in the Labour Party didn't get into politics to worry and obsess about the Labour Party. We have to gain people's trust again, and whether we like it or not, people don't trust us and haven't trusted us because we let them down in the last general election, in the 2011 election in our period in government. And we can point to statistically that we got 62% of what we wanted to achieve over the line. As I said about the spelling test analogy, people just remember the 40%. And if people feel, it's like what Maya Angelou said, it doesn't matter what you do, it's how you make people feel. And if people feel that they were let down, well, then people were let down, and we have to rebuild that trust. But I do have an answer for that. I think the next general election and local elections obviously are possibly going to come before that. But the next general election, we have to be able to say to people that there are a number of given issues that we will not bend or negotiate on, and that's the basis on which we'll go into government. And I think that will make us relevant again, and that will make us part of the debate again. I share people's worry that the Labour Party may be slightly irrelevant when it comes to the next general election, but we have to be able to say, look, in the past, we made a number of pronouncements and promises, and we didn't live up to all of them. Here are lists, and it can be free GP care for under 12s, free education, $11.50 an hour. It can be issues around climate change, housing, anti-poverty strategies. We need a list of absolutely unbending red lines, and politicians don't like talking about red lines because it means media can go, well, that's a red line, but this isn't, and how come that's not a red line? I think we have to be able to say to people at election time that these are unbending, unnegotiable priorities for us, and if you vote for us, that we will demand of them in a programme for government, and if we don't get them in the programme for government, we won't go into government. And on that basis, I think we can restore a huge level of trust.
Okay, let me ask you then one thing specifically. You campaigned in favour of the abolition of the Seanad in the 2013 referendum. What persuaded you that was the right course of action?
What persuaded me the right course of action? To be honest, I remember that, and I remember getting a phone call from the past Parliamentary Association to go and speak on that issue in the Dáil Chamber in around January of 2013, was it?
Specifically, why did you support that?
Because it was government policy, and I didn't really feel strongly about it either way. And then I was asked to make a speech at a very august gathering of past parliamentarians, and I wrote down the arguments for abolition. I gave a half an hour speech, or maybe close to that, 20 minutes, sorry, and I teased it out. And I at the time felt, that my argument actually on that day when I made that speech was that the Dáil needed so much reform that reforming the Seanad wasn't worth it. But I changed my position on that after when I became a Minister of State, because I was doing so much work in the Seanad with senators. I made a speech actually in 2014, in November.
So you now support the retention of the Seanad?
I supported it in 2014 when I made that speech in the Seanad. That on reflection, because I was doing so much work, for example, I was doing work on direct provision. The body of the Oireachtas that cared more about that issue and spoke in one voice on that issue, and the quality of the contributions on that issue were so strong that it changed my mind on the necessity for the Seanad. And I made that, and I know you're going to tell me that I'm a hypocrite for becoming a senator when I tried to abolish it. Well, if you haven't, plenty of other people will say it to me. But I made that speech on the record of the House. You can go and check the records in November 2014, making that point that I changed my mind on the validity of the House, because most of the progressive minds, and we're not necessarily a great country when it comes to having progressive politicians, but all the progressive voices that have come in the houses of the Oireachtas have tended to come from the Seanad in years past. And that is the experience actually today as well. I look around me, I see Lynn Rowan, I see Colette Kelleher, I see David Norris, obviously. I see really, really decent people trying to make a difference in legislation from a progressive point of view. So it's not perfect. I think there's a few very simple things that could be changed in order to improve it. One would be actually having the general election and the Seanad election on the same day, so people have to pick as to which one they're going to be. It shouldn't be a house for people who didn't get into the Dáil and want to get back into politics.
Careful where you're throwing stones there.
Well, pretty much what I did.
I want to move on to one last question then in that case, Aodhán, because the Labour Party, one of the unique selling points that you do have is that you have fraternal relations with the UK Labour Party, with one of the very few Irish parties, perhaps the only other exception is the Green Party, that has a directly analogous party in the UK.
Yeah.
And the existential question of this decade, both for Ireland and for the UK, is Brexit. Do you ever feel that the UK Labour Party's behaviour on Brexit is outrageous, is disgraceful?
Yeah, I do.
Expand.
I look at the greatest right-wing catastrophe in post-World War II Britain. The closed mindset of a little England mentality that has driven Britain out of one of the greatest political movements since the same period of times. It's a right-wing conspiracy that has won the day, and the left at this moment in time is completely split and incapable of providing a narrative that will oppose this entity, this movement of Brexit. I look at the Labour Party in Britain and I look back at what they did in the 90s. And in the 90s, you had a clapped out Tory party, divided by the issue of Europe, riven by division and by sleaze and corruption and all the rest of it. And the Labour Party were able to find a message that people could cling to wipe away the past and to move into the future. And unfortunately, what the Labour Party in Britain are presenting now is pretty much the past, and are afraid.
Well, they're not actually presenting anything, because they're sitting around waiting for the Tories to make mistakes and basically waiting for the house to burn down and then to say, see, we told you so.
Yeah. What they could do is they could speak to the European mainstream norm of, look, Europe is good. It has been good. It has been imperfect. It hasn't been perfect, certainly for us in the last number of years. It's a damaged product, but on the ethic of it is important. The values of it, in terms of fundamental rights and workers' rights, have been good for the UK, and we're better in. And we want to be a party that gives Britain the opportunity to rethink this move and to expose the Tory party for what they're doing and expose.
It's not just the Tory party. What about the Kate Hoeys?
Well, yeah, I know. That's what's so disappointing about it. And but rather than doing that, what you have is.
Let me just give you one scenario. Essentially, in the UK Parliament, you don't have a division across party lines in the way that you would have with most issues. Probably the largest individual group are Remainers within the Parliament, followed by soft Brexiteers, followed by probably less than 10% of the whole Parliament, the hardline Kate Hoeys and the Jacob Rees-Moggs, who essentially are happy to burn down the house. They're moving their assets offshore. They are making sure that they have the capability to protect their wealth, and they're saying the rest of you will sacrifice on the altar of our ideology. If the Labour Party wanted to, they could reach out to the saner wing of the Tory party and say, we will support you. Whereas what they're actually doing is they're voting against the government when it suits the hardline Brexiteers. And that facilitates a hard Brexit where the UK crashes out, and that will have extreme ramifications, not just for ordinary people in the UK, but also for people in Ireland, possibly more so in Ireland.
I think they're caught between a number of different stools. I mean, on one level, I think many of the safe Labour seats will be seats that voted to exit the European Union. I think there's a Eurosceptic strain within Jeremy Corbyn's brain that he doesn't believe in remaining in the European Union anyway. I think it's extremely disappointing to see a fantastic opportunity for a centre-left party to grasp. And now, while the Tory party is falling apart and the country seems to be having a meltdown, a sort of a kind of generally a mental breakdown, if you like, a nervous breakdown of in a political sense. Nothing can be done in terms of education or health or transport or any of the major issues of the day, because Brexit is occupying all of the oxygen. It's dividing the country completely. That the Labour Party is now having a row about anti-Semitism, is looking into past for solutions that are dead. And and they should be at least 20% ahead in the polls. And I don't think, the sad thing is that most sane British people are looking at the mess that Theresa May is overseeing, but they look at the opposition and say, well, that's even a bigger mess. And they're going to win the next general election, I would imagine. And it seems to me that there is the mentality amongst the hard left, which seems to have taken over the UK Labour Party, is that they think they're winning. They think they're actually winning. But the point about politics is actually to get into government and to achieve something. And it's the same in America, because I am convinced that Trump's going to get re-elected, because he is demanding all of the attention on the agenda that he is pursuing. He's the one talking about trade and jobs and the economy and immigration. There is no voice outside of him that is saying anything about any of these things. And it's deeply worrying for the centre-left, because the centre-left across Europe is not just in Ireland, it's or in Britain. If you look at Hungary, if you look at Italy, if you look at Austria, you look at Germany, this is a very, very dangerous time for politics.
Will you be a candidate in the next election?
Will I be? I already am a candidate in the next election. Yeah.
Will you win?
I hope so.
From that ringing endorsement, Aodhán Ó Ríordáin, thank you very much for talking to me.
Okay, no problem.
If you like the Here's How podcast, please rate and review the show on iTunes and other podcast providers. Share it on Facebook and Twitter. Tell your friends. But most of all, make your views heard. Call us on 076 603 5060.
Go to the website for sources and references for everything we were talking about. And while you're there, please like the show on Facebook, follow @Here's How Podcast on Twitter, and follow Aodhán Ó Ríordáin @Aodhán Ó Ríordáin. And get in touch with me if you can suggest a guest or a topic for a future show. Also, you can find out how to subscribe to the podcast for free on your computer, on your phone, or by email. It's all at www.here'show.ie. And just to remind you, there's a link to my Patreon account there. So if you'd like to support the podcast and help make it more frequent with more research, I'd really appreciate that. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. Thank you for listening.